Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'd like to say thank you to the mayor and the mayors, Mr. President, thank you, and also to the Forbes and all of the conference organizers. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to be here with you today in Wrocław. It's my first time here, and it's really, truly an amazing, beautiful city, beautiful place. I had time to go for a walk last night and to walk through the city center and around much of the city and get some exercise. And it's an amazing history, as all of you know. But what really, really struck me is not just the history, but the amazing economic transformation you have made in all of our lifetimes, in my lifetime. It really, Poland and this region of Poland really stand as an example to the world of the way in which a country and a region can transform, improve the economy, build the economy, invest in infrastructure, and become a model for so many other countries and so many other regions that are struggling to do just this. I want to talk a little bit about my theory of the creative economy and the creative class, and look forward to the panel and interacting with colleagues here to then try to bring it home to this region and the things you have accomplished, the creative strategies you are implementing, the rise of your own creative economy, creative city, and creative class. The way I see it, the world is going through really, well, you know this. You live in Wrocław, you live in Poland. You live this. The world is going through a really epical economic and social and political transformation. And in my view, I see the economic, the social and political and cultural aspects of this transformation really tied to the economic part. In the year 2007, 2008, we experienced in the world economy one of the greatest global economic and financial crises of any time in history. And, you know, the experts and the pundits will tell you this is about banking problems, a lack of regulation, bad practices with regard to mortgages, financial shenanigans, and all of that has a grain of truth. But like all great economic crises, the Great Depression of the 1930s, the crises, economic and financial panics of the 19th century and before, like all of these great economic crises, what it really signals is something bigger. I wrote a book on this. I called it The Great Reset. What it really signals is the decay of an old order, the passing of an old order, and the rise of a new economic order. And that's what the pundits, that's what the experts, that's what most of my colleagues in economics don't like to talk about. You see, from where I sit and from my perspective, we have just lived through the greatest economic transformation in all of human history. It's bigger than the transformation that happened in the rise of the Industrial Revolution when we shifted from an agrarian society to an industrial society. And if you think about that, how wrenching that transformation was when we moved from a farm-based society, a feudal society, an agricultural society, to an industrial society. If you think about the mass movements of populations from the farms to the city, you think about the class conflicts that happened in the factories. You think about the rise of the isms, fascism, socialism, communism, capitalism itself. You think about the great economic crises that happened. 2 world wars. And we know in our time that we are going through a difficult time. We see the forces of reaction all around us. We see the forces of intolerance, those who want to close the borders. We see this in Europe. We see this in Asia. We see this in North America. The United States, where I'm from, is having an election. And when you see the massing of the forces of reaction there, it's quite daunting. And the reason is we don't really fully understand this transformation. But let me give you a sense of how big it is. When I say it's the biggest transformation in all of human history. For all of human history before this time, we as human beings in human civilizations, in our cities and towns and nations, created wealth basically by using our physical labor power, our arms, our backs, our legs, our strength, to transform nature. For most of our time on Earth, we were agriculturally based and resource-based societies. We worked on farms. We settled near fertile river beds, river deltas. We organized ourselves in farming communities. We tended the land. And then with the great industrial revolution that Adam Smith and David Ricardo and Karl Marx wrote about, we shifted from an agrarian-based society to one where industry and manufacturing became the source of wealth several hundred years ago on this continent. We raised our productivity orders of magnitudes. We invested in new machinery and technology. We grew ever larger cities and communities, like this one, like Warsaw, like Hamburg, like Frankfurt, like Pittsburgh, like Detroit, and the list goes on. We became an industrial society. But even with the shift from agriculture to industry, we remained an economy that was limited by our physical assets, our raw materials, and our physical labor power. Marx said, what made human beings different from other species was the fact that we used our labor power in factories. The rise of a working class that shared its physical labor as a group of people that would power the economy and ultimately, in his optimistic view, power social change. Classical economists and neoclassical economists had a similar view. They phrased it differently. They said the forces of production, the factors of production, are three. If you wanted to grow your economy, you would harness the three factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Our physical beings, our physical power, our ability to work in factories with our backs and our brawn and create these giant industrial complexes powered growth. But over the past several decades, the nature of that economy has changed. In the United States, in Canada, throughout Europe, and now in Asia and Latin America as well. We have created a new economic force. Agriculture has shrunk as a sector of our economy. 100 or 200 years ago, well more than 50% of our entire workforce in the world, perhaps as much as 70 or 80%, worked in and around farms. Now in the most advanced countries, less than 1% of the workforce in Japan or the United States or Canada work in agriculture. Manufacturing, the working class, heavy industry, which employed well more than half of the workforce in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, in Japan, in Poland, as of 1950, has declined. In the United States today, a daunting figure, only 5% of the workforce are involved in direct factory production. Something new has occurred. The rise of a new kind of economy and a new kind of class that I call the creative class. Scientists, engineers, researchers, innovators, entrepreneurs. But not just them. Artists, designers, musicians, media, entertainment, knowledge workers in business and management, healthcare, education, and the law have become a new economic force and a new economic class. This class numbers a third of the workforce in places like the United States and Canada, and I'll get to Poland's figures in just a minute. You do quite well. But in the most advanced economies, in the economies that have been most engaged in this transformation, in places like Singapore, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Australia, and New Zealand, already more than 40% of the workforce are members of this new class. And in the great urban centers of the world, in New York, in London, in San Francisco, Paris, and I could go on. Same could be said here in Wrocław or Warsaw, Berlin, Vienna. Upwards of 50% of the workforce already are members of this creative economy and creative class. And in the urban centers and in the city centers, in some places 80 or 90% of the workforce are members of this creative class. The creative class is to our time what the working class was to my father's time. The economic driving force. Now people hear this and they say, what Florida is talking about is a creative elite. A group of urban creative workers, artists, yuppies, sophistication, cosmopolitans, trendoids. Can techies and street musicians really power the economy? They misread my theory of the creative class. My theory of the creative class is every human being is creative. In order to compete and win as cities and nations, we must stoke the creative furnace that lies deep within every single creative individual. I learned this not by studying the innovative frontier or the artistic frontier of the economy. I learned this from my father. My dad's name was Louis Florida. He was born in 1921, the son of immigrants from southern Italy to the United States. My dad was born in the factory town of Newark, New Jersey. He was a child of the Great Depression. On the day he turned 13 and could get his working papers, he excused himself from his 7th grade classroom and took up work in an eyeglass factory in the iron-bound, so named because it was bounded by train tracks, iron-bound industrial section of Newark, where he worked along other Italian-American, Irish-American, Polish-American, Jewish-American, Latin and Hispanic-American, and African-American workers. My dad fought in the battles of World War II and came back to the factory where he worked from age 13 to age 65, making eyeglasses just like these. And when I was a young boy, I wanted to see where my dad worked, and I begged him to show me where he went in the morning. And my dad said, "No, Richard, your job is to get an education, to get in school. My job is to work in the factory so you don't have to." But I was demanding, I was persistent, and on Saturdays, on the weekend when the factory was running overtime, my dad would relent. And I would travel with him to the factory and enter the factory gates and see this massive brick industrial factory making eyeglass after eyeglass. And I was so fascinated by the machines and the technology, and I still am to this day a student of machining and technology. My dad tapped me on the shoulder. I must have been 10 or 11 or 12 at the time. He told me this first. I've since heard it from every great industrialist, every great CEO, every great creative entrepreneur. My dad said, "Richard, it's not the machines that make this factory great. It's the knowledge, it's the intelligence, it's the creativity of the people who work here. That's what I mean when I say creative class. Our mission, our challenge, our role, our objective has to be to expand the frontiers of the creative economy, to include every single individual, whether they work on a farm or in a factory, or if they toil in the service class. I'll be writing a major report on the service class, the largest class. The people who serve us our food in restaurants, take care of us in hotels, take care of our homes, service our cars, help us when we take trains and mass transit, take care of our children or our aging parents. This is the source of inequality in our time. It is a divide between the knowledge workers and the creatives who are doing okay, even those of us who are struggling, and the masses and millions and multitudes of service workers who are sinking further and further behind. Every single human being is creative. We have to stoke that furnace which lies deep within each and every one of us. If every single human being is creative, that means creativity will not accept the social categories of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and others we have imposed on ourselves. Creativity requires diversity, not because diversity is a social goal, it is, not because it's an ethical principle, of course, but because diversity is a prerequisite for the flourishing of the creative. Creativity knows no boundary. It doesn't care about gender or race or ethnicity or sexual orientation or family style. It cuts across men and women, gay and straight, ethnically different. We are all creative beings. The most diverse places in the world that welcome the new and different are the most creative. The United States became an economic power not because it's big, not because it has raw materials, not because of any of the crazy notions of American ingenuity or manifest destiny. It became a creative power because it attracted smart people from Italy, from Poland, from Ireland, and not just great scientists and artists, the people I grew up with, in a town that was 1/3 Polish, 1/3 Irish, and 1/3 Italian. Out of this openness to immigration, the most innovative place in the world, the Silicon Valley, isn't innovative because it has innovative Americans. More than 50% of the high-tech business founders in Silicon Valley were not born in the United States. They migrated from all over the world. Creativity requires diversity. I call it the 3 T's. In order to be a creative leader as a nation or as a region or as a city, you have to do the 3 T's. The first T is technology. You have to invest in technology, invest in innovation. Innovation powers growth. We know that. Invest in great universities and knowledge centers. What a great advantage for Wrocław. And indeed, in our estimates, I'm providing this from a report we will be releasing in July or August on the Global Creativity Index. Poland, out of roughly 200 nations, ranks 53rd. About the top 25% on our technology index. But technology alone is a necessary but insufficient condition to compete. You need to be a place that magnetizes, attracts, and retains talent. Increasingly, it is where the talent wants to be and where the talented people want to stay, where companies come and nest and grow. Poland ranks 25th. 25th out of the 200 nations or so in the world on our talent index, a measure of highly educated individuals and the share in the creative class. But in order to compete and win, you not only need technology and talent, you need tolerance. I lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city that had great universities and great companies, had great educational institutions. I taught at a great university in Pittsburgh. But the companies and startups and people Pittsburgh made would move away. The third T is tolerance. You need to be open-minded, open to different. You need to be the kind of place people from different parts of the world, gay and straight, girl and boy, man and women, singles and marrieds, families, can all have a go. And Poland struggles and has struggled on this score. If it ranks 25th in talent, 53rd in technology, it ranks 100 in tolerance. Overall, on our cumulative index of the creative capacity, the Global Creativity Index, Poland ranks 46th, which is actually very good, but in order to improve that ranking, tolerance is a key factor that must move forward. Right now, as I said, Poland has 1/3 of the workforce in the creative class. And here is a very interesting asset for your country. Whereas most advanced countries have 40 or 45 or 50% of their workforce in the low-wage struggling service class, Poland only has 28%. This can mitigate your economic divide as you make this transformation, because Poland, as a country that is still in the midst of economic transformation, has 20% of its workforce in the working class and another 18% in the agricultural class. So as you move forward, your creative class is already strong. It's important to address the wages and working conditions and to make sure the service class has support, to make sure you can creatify these service jobs. As you move from an agricultural and a manufacturing industrial economy to a creative one, to make sure the service workers can also use their creativity as well. Now, if the new economy is powered by creativity, if creativity requires diversity, if the 3 T's of technology, talent, and tolerance power economic growth, there's one additional factor you need to consider and understand and harness. Many people who've studied the new knowledge and innovation economy say that what it does is annihilate geographic boundaries, annihilate distance, that the world is now global. What is Polish and what is Italian and what is American and what is Japanese has melted as we've all become the same. The world, in the words of Thomas Friedman, is flat. Well, for many things the world is flat. For simple manufacturing, for simple services, but for the most important things, for the things that are the source of real competitive advantage, for innovation and knowledge generation and creativity, the world is not flat at all. As globalization has proceeded, it has actually made the world more concentrated and clustered. The world has become flat on the one hand, but very, very clustered, concentrated, and spiky on the other. And in place of the nation state, we now have and in place of the old factory complexes, we now have a new social and economic organizing unit that has risen to the floor. And that's why we're all here today. You see, the city, the community, the place itself has become the new economic, social, and organizing unit, the place where the 3 T's in creativity come together. Our cities are the key to our social and economic future. They have supplanted the factory and the nation state as the place that collects technology, attracts and harnesses talent, and sends out the signals of being tolerant. For the past 20 years, I've worked on what makes creative cities and why they are important. I've worked on why, if you want to compete and thrive, you have to invest in all 3 T's. Doing one alone is a necessary but insufficient condition. The places that define the frontier excel at all 3. I've distilled a basic theory of what makes cities and communities great. And here in Wrocławiu, you have many of these assets needed to compete and thrive. When all is said and done, I call this quality of place. Note what I said, quality of place not quality of life. Quality of place means bringing together all three T's, harnessing creativity, investing in creative people. But it actually forms a fourth T of its own. A T you might call the territorial assets of a place. Quality of place means the physical environment, the natural environment, the natural setting that you are blessed with. The wonderful green areas, or riversides, or waterfronts. The natural environment that you are given. And what we find is that creative people and knowledge workers are stimulated by this kind of natural and green environment. In my book, The Rise of the Creative Class, I talk about the need to exercise, to go outside, to recharge. Working in a creative field is different than working in an assembly line. People need this interaction and engagement with the outdoors. The quality of place is not just about the natural environment, it's about the built environment. It's about the built environment we create. It's about our history, our architectural heritage. The world has become completely generic. We see the same shops and the same stores all over the world. What the creative class wants is things that are quite unique, that provide signals of history. That's why the creative class across the world gravitates to older inner cities. In fact, in our research, we have found clearly a shift of high-tech companies away from the suburban office parks and suburban office highway interchanges, back to the dense urban cores in London, out of Silicon Valley, back to the dense urban centers of San Francisco, in lower Manhattan in New York, in Berlin, in Stockholm, in Toronto, and I could go across the board. The creative class wants the kind of history. My mentor, Jane Jacobs, said this so clearly. New ideas require old buildings. Historical and architectural heritage. And of course, quality of place means culture. Active, engaged culture. The ability to participate and to hear music, experience theater, but also make it. Live and vibrant music scenes. Quality of place is the character of the place itself, its natural and physical environment. The energy of the place, the people meeting and mixing that I saw out in the square last night, and the energy, the human energy. This provides a signal that a place is open to the creativity of all. When we studied the things that not only drive economic growth, but make residents happy, delighted, and satisfied in their communities. And Mr. Mayors, I think you'll enjoy this. We studied hundreds of thousands of people, and we asked them not only what contributes to their pocketbook, what makes them satisfied, what makes them recommend the community to their relatives, to their friends, to say they love their community and they're attached to it. They said having a good job was important. Having great streets and infrastructure was key. Being safe was central. But there were two things that stood out at the top of the list. One was being a place that was open to all different kinds of people, young and old, rich and poor, entrepreneur, factory worker, gay or straight, family or single, able-bodied or disabled, a place that was open to all and all could thrive, everyone's well-being and attachment group. And the top-ranked factor was the quality of the place itself. More than jobs, more than roads, more than infrastructure, more than crime and safety. The ability to have a place that you could see its quality, its history, its authenticity, its realism, its energy was the top-ranked factor at all, not just in the pocketbook, but in the heart. Well, I'm a professor, which means I could keep you here listening to me lecture all day. But I want to end with a story. And I want to end with a story about a town that I visited about 20 years ago to this day in the United States. Town is Seattle. And at the time, Seattle was struggling to shift from an old port trading city, trading lumber and natural goods and manufacturing, to a new knowledge-based economy. It had had some successes. Microsoft had set up shop there. It was the home of Starbucks, which was a struggling small company at the time, just a few stores in Seattle. And I was meeting with the mayor and the council leaders, the political leaders, Chamber of Commerce, and they were asking me what Seattle could do to become more competitive. I didn't even have the word creative, more innovative. And I was touring their downtown, which looked nothing like your square, which had boarded up buildings and abandoned places and tremendous homelessness. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw a new building being built. And I asked my guests, what was this big new building that was unlike anything I had ever seen? Because it wasn't vertical or rectilinear, it was very curvilinear. Swooping lines, sloping lines. And they said, this is a building being built by an architect at the time who was less famous, Frank Gehry, who's now very famous, a starchitect so-called. And it was something that one of the city fathers, Paul Allen, the man who was co-founder of Microsoft with Bill Gates, was doing to give back to the town that made him great. And I thought to myself, what would Paul Allen, this great software entrepreneur and software developer, what would he be building to commemorate the things that in his town, his community, helped him to become so successful? And the first thing that ran through my head was this had to be the new Seattle Science Center. After all, Paul Allen was a software developer. He was investing back in his town to show the young people in residence how important science and software is to economic growth. But it wasn't a Seattle Science Center. And then I thought, okay, he's an entrepreneur, he's an inventor. He's not just a scientist, he applies science to commerce to create a new product. It's the Seattle Center of Discovery and Invention. His idol is not Einstein, but Edison. But no, it wasn't the Seattle Center of Discovery. And I thought, well, he's a wealthy, wealthy man, he's a billionaire many times over. It probably then would be the Seattle Center for Entrepreneurship, to show young people the value of applying their capability to making money. But it wasn't the Seattle Center of Entrepreneurship. It was none of those things. My host told me what he was building was called the Jimi Hendrix Experience Music Project. You see, it wasn't a great scientist, it wasn't a great inventor, it wasn't Einstein or Edison or even a great robber baron that stimulated this man, Paul Allen. It was a great musician, also from Seattle, who wasn't white like Paul Allen, who happened to be African American, a black musician from the ghettos, whose mother killed herself and was raised by his father, who found the guitar and found his passion. Took that guitar and transformed the way we heard music, moved to Europe, to England, found two Englishmen and created a band, toured the world. And when he made a little money, created his own studio, his own creative place. And what's so interesting about that studio, Electric Ladyland Studios, is Jimi Hendrix was a major technological innovator. He worked on amplifiers and guitar technology and foot pedals and sound effects. But in his studio, he empowered the creatives themselves. He was the first musician who took the technical console from behind a glass wall and put it out so the musicians could record themselves, so the creatives could control the means of production. Did all of that before he died tragically at age 27. You see, you never know where the creative spark is going to come from. Don't let anyone tell you that a scientist begets a scientist, a technologist begets a technologist. Artists are only about arts and culture. Creativity requires, all of them requires diversity. It was a young African-American musician who stimulated the mind of one of the most important software developers and entrepreneurs of our age. You never know where that creative spark will come from, but where it surely comes from is from a great and open-minded and high-quality community. Thank you so much for listening to me.